Do you know who I am? He hit a pregnant nurse and walked away smiling. He had no idea who her husband was. Do you know who I am? I donated 3 billion won to this building. I will have your license pulled before your shift ends. That's your right. But you're still not coming through this hallway. She wasn't supposed to be a problem. That was what men like Cha Sung-won believed about women like her. Quiet women. Working women. Women who kept their heads down and their badges clean and never made noise about the things that happened to them. He was wrong about that. And it was the worst mistake he would ever make. He tried to run. Oh Min-jae was already waiting on the tarmac. Stay till the end. Because what happens to Dr. Lim is the most quietly satisfying ending on this entire channel. And I promise you, you are not ready for it. Welcome to K-Afro Diary besties. Subscribe to K-Afro Diary cause every week something new happens right here. Let's go. The ICU never slept. Monitors beeped in steady overlapping rhythms. The air carried the particular smell of antiseptic and vigilance that existed nowhere else in the world. Nurses moved fast and said little because in this unit, a wasted second was a borrowed life. Sena-Oh had worked this floor for 6 years. At 32, she was the one the junior nurses looked for when a vein collapsed or a family started coming apart in the hallway, or a patient coded at 3 in the morning and nobody else had the steadiness to hold the room together. She was the calm that kept everything from breaking. The floor ran on her knowledge and her presence, the way a ship runs on a navigator who doesn't panic. She was also 7 months pregnant. Her feet ached from the 4th hour of every 12-hour shift. Her lower back carried a dull, grinding pain that she had stopped mentioning because there was no point mentioning it. Between rooms she pressed one hand briefly to the curve of her belly, took a slow breath and kept moving. Nobody on the floor knew much about her life outside the hospital. She didn't talk about where she'd grown up. She didn't mention her husband. When people asked, she smiled gently and moved the conversation somewhere else. Nobody knew. Nobody was supposed to. Nobody knew that the quiet nurse adjusting in 4-line in room 5, with the steady hands and the unhurried voice and the way of making frightened patients feel like everything was going to be all right, was married to Oh Min-jae. Oh Min-jae did not work in hospitals. He did not appear at charity events or in business journals or on the boards of foundations that put his name on buildings. He moved through Seoul the way a current moves through still water, invisible until the moment it wasn't, and by then it was too late to swim against it. He was the most feared man in the Seoul criminal underworld. His organization had no official name. His face appeared in no police database. He had kept that world entirely separate from Sena since the day they married. Not because he was ashamed of what he was. Because she had asked him to. Let me just be a nurse, she had told him the night before their wedding. Let me have something that is only mine. Don't let what you are follow me into that building. He had honored that. Every single day. But peace, it turned out, had enemies. The double doors at the end of the hallway hit the walls at 2:17 in the afternoon. Every head on the floor turned. The man coming through them wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most nurses made in 4 months. He walked like a man who had never once been asked to wait for anything. Behind him, an assistant held a folded cloth against the man's right palm. Small cut. The kind from a broken glass at a lunch meeting. The kind that needed a bandage strip and nothing else. His name was Cha Sung-won. 51 years old. The founder of 2 technology companies that had made him famous and 1 venture that had made him untouchably rich. A man who had spent the last decade buying influence the way other people bought furniture. Steadily without much thought, because it was simply available and he could afford it. He had donated 3 billion won to the hospital's new cardiac wing the previous year. He had the letter from the board to prove it, framed in his office in Gangnam. He scanned the ICU like a man assessing square footage. I need a doctor. Not a resident. Not someone training. Senior physician. A young doctor named Park rushed toward him, voice low, hands out, already apologizing before he had finished understanding what was happening. He tried to explain. This floor was critical care. The injury on the man's hand was minor. The main emergency department was 2 floors below and had everything needed to treat it. Sungwon grabbed the front of Park's coat and shoved him sideways into the nurse's station. The floor stopped breathing. Sungwon stepped forward, scanning rooms, looking for an empty bed or a corner he could command, or anyone who would simply do what he said without the complication of having a spine. Senna stepped out of room 5. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stepped into the hallway and stood there, 7 months pregnant in her scrubs, with a particular stillness of someone who has already decided how this is going to go. Sungwon stopped walking. He looked at her the way certain men look at people they have decided don't matter. Like furniture that had developed an inconvenient opinion. Do you know who I am? His voice dropped into something quieter and uglier. I donated 3 billion won to this building. I will have your license pulled before your shift ends. That's your right, Senna said. She didn't move. But you're still not coming through this hallway. Something broke open in his face. The practice control cracked and something colder came through underneath it. He reached into his jacket and produced a leather card case. He flipped it open and extended it toward Dr. Park, who had pressed himself against the wall. Pick a number, Sungwon said. Whatever it takes to move one of these patients to another floor. I don't care which one. I need a bed. Park's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Senna spoke instead. Put that away. Her voice didn't move once. Not a tremor in it. Money doesn't change which patients are stable enough to be relocated. The man in room 3 had open heart surgery 14 hours ago. He cannot be moved for a hand laceration. Sungwon turned to look at her slowly, the card case still open. You're a nurse, he said. And the way he said it made the words sound like something you scraped off a shoe. You don't make those decisions. On this floor, she said, I do. For a moment the hallway was completely silent except for the monitors. Then Sungwon launched into it. Loud and ugly and relentless. He talked about her competence and her education and her salary and her place in the order of things. He said things that made the junior nurses at the station look at their hands. He talked about her scrubs. He talked about what she was worth and what she was not worth and what someone like her was doing in a unit like this, thinking she had any authority at all. Senna absorbed every word without flinching. She turned toward the wall phone to call security. That was when Sungwon hit her. The sound of it was wrong. Too sharp for a hospital. Too loud. It split the quiet of the ICU like something structural giving way. His palm connected with the side of her face with full force. Her head snapped sideways. The clipboard in her hand hit the floor. She stumbled back, one shoulder catching the edge of the nursing station, and her hands flew immediately to her belly. Both of them, wrapping around the curve of it in the automatic, instinctive motion of a woman protecting what she was carrying. She didn't fall. But her eyes closed for a second. And that second said everything. The floor was silent. Not quiet. Silent. The particular silence that follows something irreversible. A junior nurse named Ji Young stood frozen at her station, both hands pressed flat against her own face. The security guard near the elevator had his hand on his radio and had not moved. No one had moved. The oxygen had simply left the building. Sungwon straightened his jacket cuffs. Maybe now you understand how this works, he said. Down the hallway near the exit stairwell, a tall man in a dark coat stood with his hands in his pockets. He had not moved since the doors opened. He had watched everything. The shove, the threats, the slap, the way Senna's hands went to her belly. He had a tattoo on the left side of his neck. A wolf's eye. Half open. Watching forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for anything. He took out his phone, typed 4 words and sent them. Then he walked out through the side door. Dr. Lim arrived 60 seconds later. He was the chief of medicine, 60 years old. Silver-streaked hair. Known throughout the hospital for maintaining composure in situations that unmade other people. He walked in, took in the room. Senna still steadying herself against the nursing station, Sungwon standing with his arms folded, the junior staff arranged in various states of visible distress, and made his decision in under 3 seconds. You chose wrong, Mr. Cha. Dr. Lim extended his hand toward Sungwon. His voice smooth and welcoming. I'm so sorry for this. Let's get you taken care of immediately. Sena looked at him. He did not look at her. Not once. Sungwon rolled his shoulders. Your nurse obstructed patient care and was aggressive toward me. I responded appropriately. Dr. Lim nodded the way men nod when they've already decided what they're going to say and are simply waiting for the other person to finish. He did not check the cameras. He did not speak to witnesses. He did not look at the red marks spreading across the face of the pregnant woman 10 feet away. He turned to Sena and his voice flattened. I'm going to have to terminate your employment effective immediately. Please surrender your badge and collect your personal items. The shock hit her somewhere behind the sternum. Not surprise exactly. She had half known the moment Dr. Lim walked through the door and looked straight past her. It was the witnesses that made it land. The nurses and doctors and security staff who had watched Cha Sungwon strike a pregnant woman across the face and were now staring at the floor. 2 security guards walked her out. Not roughly but firmly, the way people carry out orders they don't feel good about but haven't decided to refuse. She handed over her badge. She emptied her locker into a paper bag. She walked the length of the main corridor past the patient she had cared for, past the break room where she had eaten hundreds of lunches, past the room where she had once held an elderly man's hand while he died because no family had come. The front doors opened. Cold air hit her face. It was raining. She stood on the wet pavement and took out her phone. There was already an email from a law firm. Cha Sungwon was filing a civil claim against her for professional misconduct and interference. She read it twice. Then she started walking. By the following morning, her bank cards were declined. Her accounts had been frozen. Sungwon's legal team had moved with the speed of people who had done this before and knew exactly which pressure points to hit first. When she got home, there was an eviction notice taped to her door. She sat in the dark apartment with both hands on her stomach and breathed slowly until the shaking stopped. She had built this life herself. Insisted on it. A career that was entirely hers, separate from her husband's world, earned shift by shift and patient by patient over 6 years. She had wanted something clean. Something that belonged to her alone. She had been proud of that. It was gone in a single afternoon. She held that for a long time, the full weight of it. Then she stood up. She went to the bedroom, opened the drawer of her nightstand, and took out the other phone. The one Min Jae had pressed into her hands the morning after their wedding, holding both her hands around it, not speaking, just looking at her until she nodded. She had charged it faithfully once a year. She dialed his number. Oh, Min Jae answered before the first ring had finished. He already knew. He had been in that hallway. He followed her to the hospital some days. Not to interfere, never to interfere, just to be close enough to know she was safe, a thing he had done quietly since their first year of marriage and which she had long suspected and never asked him to stop. He had seen the slap in real time. Had watched her hands go to her belly. Had watched the chief of medicine choose a donor over his wife without a second's hesitation. He had walked out the side door not because he didn't care but because Sena had made him promise on the day they married that he would never act on her behalf in that world without her asking first. He had spent the last 23 hours waiting. I need your world tonight, she said. Her voice was quiet and steady and it cost her something to say it. He closed his eyes. You never have to justify asking me for that, he said. His voice was the calmest it had ever been. Go to sleep, Sena. I'll handle everything. It will all be handled before you wake up. He set the phone down on the glass table of his penthouse office, looked out at the Seoul skyline, and made 4 calls. By morning, Cha Sungwon's problems had already begun. Sungwon found out at dinner. He was at his private club in Cheongdam, the kind of place with no sign on the door and no prices on the menu. Having ordered a bottle of something very old to celebrate the afternoon's events. When he placed his card on the tray, the server came back 2 minutes later with the expression of someone who wished they were working anywhere else. Declined. Sungwon called his private banker. There were 6 missed calls already on his phone. His company's stock had dropped 17% in the last 3 hours. His 3 offshore accounts, in jurisdictions chosen specifically for their discretion, were empty, not withdrawn, as though the money had never been deposited at all. His head of security received a text message. Someone watched the man read it, watched the color leave his face, watched him put his phone carefully in his pocket, stand up from the table, and walk out of the club without a word or a glance back. Someone sat alone at a table with an untouched bottle and no way to pay for it. He spent the night attempting to hire people who made problems disappear. He had names, serious names, men who had handled things for important people in the city and left no evidence. He met the first one in a parking structure at midnight, slid a case across the hood of a car, and showed him what had been waiting in his mailbox when he got home. Black envelope, dark red wax seal, stamped with a wolf's eye. The man looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he pushed the case back, got into his car and drove away. The second man didn't sit down. He looked at the seal and shook his head before someone finished speaking. The third, a man with a reconstructed jaw and a reputation for cases nobody else would take, looked at the seal, looked at someone and said very quietly, "You hit someone you should never have touched. There is nobody in this city who will take this work. Not for any price." "Why?" someone demanded. The man looked at him with something between pity and exhaustion. "Because the person who sent that envelope doesn't negotiate. He only collects. And the woman you hit," he paused, "she's his wife." Someone went very still. The man stood up, picked up his coat, and left without another word. Someone drove to the private airfield he used for his jet at 2 in the morning. He had emergency cash. He had a destination. Get out. Get somewhere the paperwork couldn't follow. Rebuild from a distance. He was 30 meters from the steps when the headlights came on. 3 black vehicles, emerging from the edges of the tarmac as though they had been parked there for hours. Which they had. 6 men stepped out. No visible weapons. No raised voices. They took his arms, placed something over his head, and drove. When they removed it, someone was kneeling on cold marble. The room was large and almost entirely dark except for the light at the far end of a long table. Sitting there, with a cup of tea and the expression of a man looking at a problem he has already resolved, was the man from the hospital hallway. The wolf's eye tattoo was clearly visible on his neck. Oh Min-jae set down his cup and looked at Cha Sung-won. Sung-won's instincts defaulted to the only tool he had. "I have connections at the ministry level," he said. His voice came out less steady than he intended. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Min-jae slid a tablet across the table. It came to rest in front of Sung-won's knees. On the screen was the ICU security footage. Full resolution. Timestamp. Showed everything. The shoving. The screaming. The slap. Sena's hands going to her belly. The guards walking her out. Dr. Lim nodding along like a man receiving good news. Sung-won stared at it. Min-jae said nothing for a long moment. "You thought she was alone," he said. His voice was quiet enough that Sung-won had to focus to hear it. "You thought nobody was watching. That nobody was coming for her." He leaned forward slightly. "She has never been alone. Not for a single day of her life since she became mine and I became hers." A lawyer stepped out of the shadows with a document case. Min-jae explained the terms without any particular emotion. Every asset. The 2 companies, the properties, the vehicles, the IP portfolio, the emergency cash that was already burning in a metal drum somewhere behind Sung-won, transferred immediately into a legal trust. The trust would fund emergency housing, legal support, and vocational programs for single mothers across Seoul. The structure was designed specifically so it could never be reversed, challenged, or unwound. A team of lawyers on 3 continents had spent the previous 18 hours making it watertight. Sung-won signed through real tears. Not the kind that come from guilt. The kind that come from watching power leave your hands and understanding that it is not coming back. When it was done, the men placed the covering back over his head. They drove for 25 minutes. When he was pushed out of the vehicle, He hit wet pavement and rolled. He pulled the covering off his head and looked up. Hospital emergency entrance signs. He was in the parking lot where Senna had stood in the rain with her paper bag of belongings, freshly dismissed from the only job she had ever loved. Sungwon sat on the wet pavement in the rain. Then the police vehicles arrived. While he had been spending the week sleeping in various uncomfortable places and discovering the precise dimensions of his new situation, Min-jae had been sending a decade's worth of documented financial records to 3 separate regulatory agencies. Tax fraud, embezzlement, cross-border wire fraud structured specifically to avoid disclosure requirements. 10 years of it, organized with the clarity of someone who had been collecting it patiently and had simply been waiting for the right moment. The officers stepped out of their vehicles. Sungwon did not run. There was nowhere to go. The morning light came through the large windows of the private suite on the 7th floor. The room was warm and quiet. Flowers on the sill. Soft light. The sound of a newborn breathing. Senna held her daughter against her chest and looked out the window at Seoul. Her daughter had arrived with dark hair and a full set of opinions about the world, all of them loudly expressed. She had her grandmother's forehead and an expression of general assessment that Senna found completely familiar. She was perfect. Oh, Min-jae sat on the edge of the bed beside his wife, looking at his daughter with an expression Senna had never seen on his face before. Something open and unguarded and entirely human. The careful composure he carried through every other room had simply left him. There was nothing in his face except the unmanaged, undisguised reality of a man looking at something he loves more than he has ever loved anything he has protected. He had purchased the hospital 4 months ago, quietly, through a set of holding companies that had taken 3 months to trace even for people who knew what to look for. He had not told Senna. He had not wanted her to feel watched over or managed in the one place she had asked to be entirely herself. The board of directors had not known who the new owner was until the paperwork was complete. When they found out, Dr. Lim had submitted his resignation the following morning, which turned out not to matter because the new ownership had already begun the process of terminating his contract for gross professional misconduct. Dr. Lim was currently employed 2 floors below. The facilities team had been short-staffed. As Senna watched her daughter sleep against her chest, she heard the sound of a mop bucket moving in the hallway outside. She glanced through the open door. She could see him, older looking than she remembered from the hallway encounter, moving slowly, eyes directed at the floor. He passed the doorway. He looked up briefly. He saw her. He looked away immediately and kept walking. She didn't call after him. She didn't need to. She looked back at her daughter's face. Min-jae reached over and touched the baby's hand. The tiny fingers closed around his little finger and he went completely still, like a man who has just been handed something he doesn't know how to hold without breaking it. "You good?" he asked. His voice was barely there. She looked at him. Her husband. The man who moved through Seoul like a current beneath still water, and who sat beside her now looking more undone by a newborn's grip than by anything his world had ever produced. "Yes," she said. She laughed softly. "We're good, Min-jae." He nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when something he had been carrying for a long time had finally been set down. Then he leaned his head gently against hers, and they sat together in the warm light of the room while their daughter slept. Downstairs in a detention facility across the city, Cha Sung-won sat on a metal bench in a jumpsuit that was nothing like the charcoal suit. The wealth was gone. The legal team was gone. The board members and investors and club acquaintances who had sat across from him at polished tables had not returned a single call since the news broke. He had spent 51 years building a life in which no was a word that applied to other people. He had learned, finally, that he had been wrong about that. Senna kissed her daughter's forehead and breathed in the warmth of her. The storm was over. Not because a powerful man had fallen, though he had, completely and without any possibility of return. Not because the coward doctor was mopping floors, though he was, and it was very quiet work. But because she was here. In this room. Her daughter against her chest. Her husband's head against hers. The world outside with no further claim on her. She had built this life herself. had insisted on keeping it clean and separate and entirely her own. She had not fully understood until now that the person sleeping beside her every night had been quietly, invisibly building a wall around it the entire time. Not to own it. Not to control it. Just to make sure nothing could touch it. The quietest people in the room are never the weakest. They are simply the ones who have not yet decided to move. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that you are never as alone as you think you are, and that the people who love you quietly are often the most dangerous people in the room to your enemies. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.